Live now. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fourth edition of Tech Biz Talks brought to you by HCL Sri Lanka. We have started our operations in 2020 during the high time of pandemic, and we have been able to nurture the nation's technology landscape by bringing innovation and global standards to Sri Lankan tech professionals. In the HCL journey so far, inaugurating Cinnamon Life, our newest facility, is about to shape the ambitions of Sri Lankan technology atmosphere, creating opportunities for the tech aspirates from just after A levels for your career. Now we can take a small look at the video how we have inaugurated our newest facility in last November. TechBiz Talk has been a great way of bringing and starting a conversation about the newest trends in IT and the involvement and the impact that it creates to the society, as well as for the technical and IT professionals. So, before we start the today's topic, we have Rajesh Srinivasan, director at HCL Switzerland, with about 22 years of experience in the IT industry. Before we start with today's topic, I would like to invite Salil Batarji, consultant and a senior leader at HCL, who will walk you through the HCL Sri Lanka and our journey so far. Sir Salil,
Hi,
over to you.
hi, Bhavan, and good afternoon. Before Rajesh starts, just I will take a few minutes to quickly take you through what's HCL. Just some of the numbers. HCL, as many of you would know, that HCL is a $11.1 billion US dollar company with presence in 52 countries, with about 250 plus delivery centers in those countries, and with a workforce of about 197,000, comprising of about 163 nationalities. So that's the number front, but HCL has been the fastest growing large technology company for the last 5 years. And in 2021 alone, 200 plus leadership recognitions came our way. We have been rated as the number one employer in the professional services sector, and so that's the whole about HCL. But while HCL is growing or has been growing phenomenally for the last 5 years or so, uh, we didn't ignore our customers. In fact, the growth practically come because of the customers. So how do we measure that? So we have a system of customer satisfaction, which is run by a third-party agency, which rates the customer responses under the four key parameters, that is loyalty, advocacy, satisfaction, and business value delivery. On all the four parameters, we have seen significant improvement in the last 10 decades. And I'm happy to say that all these four parameters, our scores are way beyond the industry standards. So that shows the confidence that the customer has, which has resulted into the growth that we could get in the market space. So HCL has an integrated portfolio of services and products aligned to the business challenges across the key industry verticals and geographies. So it's predominantly divided into three segments. So first is the IT and business services, which is actually the comprehensive end-to-end offering for the traditional and both transitional or transformational needs of the next generation enterprises, with a focus on building resilience across their digital foundation, which many people say or call it as infrastructure services, digital business, which many people refer as application and system integration services, and digital operations. The second segment is engineering and R&D services, which helps in accelerating product development by leveraging the latest technologies, monetizing products and services, and providing immersive and end user experience. And the third segment is on products and platforms, where we acquire, modernize, and integrate our HCL's own product suites and offer it to the market. So for the IT and business services, we have across the globe about 25 plus innovation labs, which actually tells you the level and the depth of investment that HCL is making on this area. And in the engineering services, we are rated as number one broad-based engineering service provider. Okay, so I'll talk something more about the HCL Sri Lanka, because that may be of interest to you folks more. So as we say in HCL Sri Lanka, we have the might of a giant, but spirit of a startup. We started off our operation, as Kirulu mentioned, in September 2020. And within a short span of 14 to 16 months, and that too, please remember, that too, within where the whole world is going through the pandemic, and most of us are working from home most of the time during this period, we have grown from practically zero to 1,400 plus employees as headcount in Sri Lanka, which comprises of 95% recruits from Sri Lanka alone. Our growth target is huge. We are targeting to grow year on year by 1,500 to 2,000 people. We would like to add that to our workforce. We started our operations in September from our first facility in Orion City. And since then, as you saw in the video, on November 2021, we got our second facility in Cinnamon Life, which is in the heart of Colombo, on Colombo 2. And just to give you a background of this facility, it's a 26th floor building, and HCL has taken 20 floors out of it. So as first phase, we got the possession of first 5 floors, which we inaugurated in November. The next 5 floors are coming our way in April, that is 2 months from now. And the subsequent floors should be coming to us in next 6 to 8 months' time. So far, we have transitioned 50 Fortune 500 companies' services to be delivered from Sri Lanka. And we are happy to share with you that the experience so far has been really great. The quality of people that we have seen in Sri Lanka is at par with anywhere else in the world. Yes, there are certain challenges in certain skills or the availability of them, but I'm sure you will see a lot of investment coming from HCL to enhance those skills within Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka our HCL Sri Lanka didn't happen just like that, because HCL earlier had been going to places wherever customers were taking us. But about 10 years back, HCL made a conscious decision to reach out to those places which are not in the primary focus in terms of skill availability, in terms of the IT landscape of the world. So, both in India and outside of India, we started venturing into newer areas with an objective to develop the local talent, build up the local skills, help the local economy, and also create a disaster recovery and BCP location for our customers. So, with that objective, we came to Sri Lanka. So, our biggest asset is people, because as you have seen, most of my discussion stayed around number of people or number of employees, number of entrepreneurs we have. So, looking forward to see you all in HCL. Thank you.
Thank you, Salil. So, today's topic is SRE transforming the operational world. So, Rajesh, handing over to you to deliver the session.
Yeah, thanks, Kurul. Yeah, if you can bring the presentation up, right? I think Kurul did introduce. So I have around 20 years of experience uh, driving IT delivery. Last couple of months, I've been moved to a different team. Basically, I take care of competency and talent management in HCL for Europe. And of course, as part of the session, I'll also give some overview of what's happening in the market space, right, and why SRE is important. Right, I'll probably split into three parts. My session is into three parts, basically. You can go to the next slide, Kirulu. The first one is primarily on what's happening in the market, right, across enterprises, what's happening, so that there's a context setting for you to know why SRE is getting adopted big time, right? Second one is basically getting into the deep dive of what SRE is all about. There is a lot of discussions about DevOps. Is it same as DevOps or is it different? Some overview of what SRE is. And the last session is something you might be interested in. What's in for me, right? What are the job opportunities? And if I need to get into a SRE mindset or get into a SRE stream, what should I equip myself with? Whether you are a developer who wants to get into SRE world or an operations person who want to upskill yourself into SRE, how do you go about? Right, so that's the whole context for this session. Of course, please feel free if you have any questions. We'll try to see how we can answer them at the end of the session. Right? See, that's the agenda of this session that we have. We can move forward. Yeah, so this is the first part of the session. What's happening across, right? Some history about how IT evolved and then where we are currently, right? That's how we get into it. Yeah, next, we can go to the next slide. So historically, if you look at, right, when I was probably my first job at HCL 20 years back was trying to create was part of an embedded project, right, where we had to develop a system for modems, right. And I distinctly recollect that we had the same set of team. We were involved in development. We did the testing. We also did the production rollout, right. So it was a small team, right? And of course, we were all doing a bit of everything, right? What we call as full stack now is something I think IT, we all worked a couple of years back in the same model, right? So after that, what happened was when the scale grew, then you had a IT as change business. Anything that was related to projects or changing of functionality was marked as development. Anything that used to do with running a business, as you know, is marked into IT operations. So slowly over a period of time, what happened was these two became two big silos, right? Development was focusing on churning out new releases. Operations team was focusing on how do I stabilize my system? How do I do a monitoring of my platforms? How do I make sure the SLAs are committed? So slowly these two worlds were slowly becoming siloed. It was like a wall. Development team did not know my core, where is it running on? What are the systems? The development environment and production environments were different completely. Right? Operations was not aware of what capability is getting developed by the ITT, right? So this whole silo became distinct, that it was really challenging. So development had their own tools, IT operations had its own tools. So this is the scenario where in the last couple of years you had two separate teams. Right? That's the context setting. Now going to the next slide, right? And what is the impact of that? So that's what we need to understand. Kirula, if you can go to the next slide. Uh, so these are some of the challenges that we see, right? Having two separate teams. So what is happening on the right hand side? If you look at, right, you have a set of different teams managing the entire IT life cycle. Right? You have dev teams, you have testers, you have infrastructure teams managing infrastructure, and then you have network and security teams. So you have a huge set of teams slowly getting created. And then within the operations world, what is happening? Right? If you know, as you all know, right, every enterprise is moving towards a cloud first scenario. It is no longer a monolith application where you kind of look at a log file and start looking at what's happening. The whole containerization and cloud first scenario has completely changed the equations of how operations has to be managed. It is becoming more complex, right? Managing microservices where you have multiple services running in different systems. Some could be on-prem, some could be on cloud, right? The other push is development teams are looking at more agile ways of working. We are trying to look at how do I push more features into production as fast as possible, right? Faster releases. Whereas operations team historically are not tuned to that. They always feel I need to have a time. They look at a release every 3 months or every month. They have a planned release. So they are struggling to manage the kind of workload that comes from the development team. So these are the challenges currently. Right? Operations team are historically mapped as a run team. So the focus was always on making the costs down, right? So not too much of investments in terms of the run part of it. So historically that has been the problem, and currently it is exploding big time because of the cloud, right? And the way the development SDLC lifecycle has changed. So this is the context setting for you before we go to the next slide on right how on what is the change that's happening on the overall enterprise. Kiran, if you can go to the next slide. So now this is so now that we know what the problems are, now one big change that's happening across enterprises. If you look at, I was part of a lot of many customer discussions across Europe, and every in the last year or so or last 2 years, every customer is trying to adopt the product ways of working. Right? I'll explain a bit more on what it is. It is not about building a product or building a product, but leveraging the product, the way product companies drive their business, right? So adopting some of the practices from that and adopting to an enterprise. That's what is called as a product model. I'll probably explain in the next slide, but this is the context. So every large enterprise is looking at adopting a product mindset, right? If you can go to the next slide, so what does it mean, right? So this is a very important aspect that we all need to understand because this is the change that is driving a lot of things, right? Traditionally, we were looking at a project-based organization. If you look at probably 5 years back or 10 years back, every large company used to start a project. When there is a huge development activity, they used to call it as a project, right? Now, currently, it is every enterprises are talking about products. So now we have to see what does it mean. So historically, if you look at, let's look at the first one as a teams, how the teams are composed of. When you have a project-based team, right? You always have a project manager, you have a project lead, you have a set of testers, you have a business analyst. So based on the project life cycle, the teams are the team sizes change, right? So that's how it is. But currently, when you look at a product team, it is persistent. Right? For example, when I say persistent, you have a squad or a scrum team. They are there till the application is live in production. So that means they are not dismantled after a project. So that is one. Second thing is what is their core objective, focus. If you look at a project, they look at, okay, these are the changes I need to do. These are the applications. So it is more focused on applications. Whereas the product teams are focusing on capability building. What is my business capability? What is my end customer? What are the services that they're offering? So they are slowly changing from an application to a more capability-driven view, right? The third one is accountability. If you look at traditionally, you have a project manager, you have a certain budget, he drives the whole program, right? The business is never involved in a project. But if you look at a product mindset, business is equally involved. You have a product owner, right? He is basically from business. He basically says what my customers want, right? So accountability moves from pure IT to a more business IT collaboration, right? That is one big change, right? And these are the key changes. Rest of the time, I'll not probably get into the details because that's not the objective. But the key message is every organization is moving towards a product mindset, and that is important because for the operations team, that is a huge change to see how that impacts the operations team. Right? So going back to the next slide, Kirulu. So typically, right, on the left, you can assume that this is your typical product construct, right? And you can still have separate teams, even though I say PO, right? You have businesses from the product owner is from business, and then you have the development team, you have the BAs, engineers, right? And then on the bottom, you have the support organization. So a typical product team has all the three together, but there is one big change. In the erstwhile product or project-based teams, the development was separate, the business teams were separate, the operations and support teams were separate. So these were three silos. Each one will not know what the other teams are doing, right? But here, when you look at product teams at the bottom, right? When you look at product team, within a Scrum team, if you look at, you have a PO, Scrum Master, Architect, you also have Ops Engineer, and that's the biggest change. So you have an operations person embedded into a product team, right? So there is no separate operations team by se. So the person needs to be part of a product team. So that is a big change. So from a historical separate silo teams, you have operations team embedded into product. So so it is no longer a separate team managing operations, but the end-to-end ownership. The product team owns building capabilities as well as running those capabilities in production. So that is big. That is one big change that is driving some of the transformation at the operations work. Right? We can go to the next slide. I will not get into the details, but one of the key things of product ways of working also is about handoff reduction. Right? When you look at historically, right, a BA used to work with the product owner or the business and understand what my capabilities are. Right? What is the requirement that you need? The BA then captures into a set of requirements that goes to the design team. The design team used to create a design and hand it over to the development team. The development team, once they complete, they hand it over to the tester and then to the operation. So basically, there is a handoff at every stage. And every handoff that happens, which means that there is a delay that happens. So end of the day, when you look at product ways of working, it is also about how do I automate a lot of things. So this slide is basically to say that every phase of the SDLC is to be looked upon as how do I reduce reduction via automation, right? So that's the summary. I will not get into the details, but you can easily visualize from the if you look at the slide, right? Every phase you are looking at ways of automating it. How do I reduce it? Whether it is continuous integration from a SDLC side point, from a time I check in the code to the time it goes to production, right? How do I automate? There are a lot of DevOps tooling that is there that helps you to drive the automation, right? So that's where it is. So this is the end of the first session where I briefly explained the challenges of having separate development and operation teams, leading to a lot of challenges. And then the way currently enterprises are moving towards a product mindset, which means the collaboration has to increase between both the teams. And the third one is automation, right? Automation to the bone, where you need to look at every part of your SDLC and say, how do we automate to make or reduce handoffs? So that's the first section. Now we'll go to the next one. Basically, we'll deep dive into what SRE is all about, right? What is SRE is going to help us solve some of the challenges, or can it solve? We can go to the next slide. Yeah. So what is SRE essentially, right? SRE, the full form of SRE is Site Reliability Engineering, right? And what is it? Right? To just put it simply, it is a set of principles or practices open sourced by Google. So generally what happens is you get an open source code, right? You have Apache Foundation where you have a lot of open source tooling or frameworks that you can leverage. But in this case, it is a set of practices that Google is leveraging to drive their production systems. So it is like a kind of open sourcing of their practices for others to leverage. And as you know, Google has huge data centers and they have a operations team. They have the same problem of how do I run my operations team efficiently, right? So this is a set of practices from Google that other companies can leverage. That could be one way of putting it. The second way is how do I apply software engineering to run operations? So not looking at operations as a cost center, but looking at can I apply some of the engineering principles to run operations, right? So that's what SRE is all about. To just put it simply, all right. Of course, if you look at Google's definition, they say it's what happens when a software engineer is asked to run operations, right? That's it. So this is what it is to be put simply. Practices of Google open source for companies to leverage of running operations. We can go to the next slide. So here, this is the general question that comes in, right? So between DevOps and SRE, are they same? Are they different? How can we compare? So DevOps is a set of practices, right, or principles, I would say, not practices. DevOps is a set of principles in terms of how to drive collaboration between Dev and Ops, right? And SRE is a set of practices that leverages DevOps, right, from DevOps. So it's not means is how do I it's a shared responsibility, right? You have development, you have operations. So you cannot have as two separate teams, but it has to be shared ownership, right? That's what is reduce silos. So that's what DevOps says, reduce silos. How does it implement SRE? How does it implement? It's a shared responsibility. It is never a development or an operations. It's a joint responsibility. So that is one. Second principle is accept failure as a norm. See, generally we say that we always say you cannot have failures in production, right? You always have an escalation. There is always a problem. But historically, we know anything that is man-made is bound to have issues, challenges. So basically, yes, you assume that there will be failures, but have a quantify in terms of there are certain ways of practices in Google. They define what is called as service level indicators, service level objectives, and SLAs, service level agreements. So use that to drive stability of your platform. So that is the second principle. The other thing is reduced waste. So DevOps always says that how do I reduce waste via automation? And of course, in SRE that will in subsequent slides we'll get into. Toil reduction is one key tenet of SRE, right? How do I How do I reduce my repetitive operations or that is happening? The third one is the fourth one is incremental change, right? DevOps says that make changes incrementally, right? You cannot historically used to have one release every 3 months, so there is always a chance that something will go wrong, right? Because you are waiting to the last moment. There are a lot of capabilities that is going to be delivered, a lot of dependencies for that matter. So that is one aspect, but SRE focus on making it very nimble, right? They focus again on can you do faster releases for the operations team to consume. And third one is measure everything. That is very important, right? It is data. You need to have a lot of data in terms of logging, alerts, metrics to figure out what's happening in the system. You can do predictive prediction of your platforms, your operation systems. Unless you have data, you cannot do much, right? So basically, the point of the slide is DevOps and SRE are not too different. SRE is basically a set of implementation aspects of DevOps. So that's what we can map it to. So going to the next slide, so what are some of the aspects of SRE? These are some of the summary aspects, right? When you say SRE, these are some of the key tenets of SRE. See, one is error budgets. So we'll talk about error budgets in the subsequent slide. So that is one. Service level agreements, again, it is very important. When I say SLA, it is also about how do I define the indicators, the objectives, and SLAs. So that is one. The third one is measurement driven. So the point is, everything has to be measured for us to know what's happening, right? So measurement driven. And toil reduction. Basically, how do I reduce any manual effort wherever possible? Of course, and there is also the concept of blameless post-mortem. Generally, what happens historically, when there is a incident or a SLA, right? So one incident, there is a RCA or root cause analysis that is done, and people try to put point on which team to blame, right? Who is to be blamed for this issue. But Google says that it should be a blameless postmortem. So look at it, not be just one root cause. There could be multiple causes for that issue to come. So look at how do I make sure that teams are looking at understanding what happened and trying to fix it rather than trying to put the blame. And also, and the last one is, of course, I did touch upon. It is never a one root cause, right? There could be multiple aspects of it to be looked at. So don't assume that just there is one root cause, right? So these are some of the tenets of what SRE is all about. We'll probably touch upon some aspects in detail in the next couple of slides. So Kiran, we can go to the next slide, please. So we'll start with this one, SLI, SLO, and SLAs. This is a very important aspect. See, generally what happens is we always say SLAs, the business always pushes that it should be 100%. I need everything to be 100%. But generally, when you look at, right, not every service needs to be 100% available, and it cannot be possible also. There has to be a right way of driving what my objectives are, right? It cannot be 100% for sure. So the way it happens is, Google says you start with your service and define what your SLI is. So SLI is basically a service level indicator. So it could be a response time, right? It could be latency. It could be anything that has an impact for your service, right? So for example, I can say that my request for my home page, right, should be less than 300 milliseconds, or 95% of my request. That could be an example of an SLI. So basically, that is the grounded on the ground. What is the measure that is required for me to validate whether the service is to the desired level or not? So it's a bottoms up. So you start with a service level indicator. Then you define the objectives. So what are the thresholds? Right? If I say response time is my indicator, then you define the threshold. Right? What could be? Should it be less than? There could be a lower and a higher threshold. It could be a range, or it could be less than a certain threshold. So that is basically your service level objectives. So these has to be all defined based on historical data. And then once you define your SLI and SLO, then comes the SLAs. Right? So SLAs are basically contractual agreements with your customer. So once you have your SLI, SLOs defined, you have a historical data. Then you define an agreement, because SLAs have a penalty attached to it, right? So hence there are service credits you need to give to the customer. So SLAs has to be taken up. You have to, hence the data is important for you to define your SLAs. So that's how this is a very important aspect of really doing a bottoms up, looking at each service and see what makes sense, and not assume that everything should be 100% available, which is practically not feasible, nor every service customer will feel that impact. Right? So this is one aspect of SRE that has to be looked into, which is critical. Next slide, Kurulu, please. So now that we define what it is, right? Now there is a very interesting concept called as error budget, right? And it might sound simple, or you might feel that what is a big deal, but this helps a lot of collaboration and a lot of ownership to the teams to define how I leverage it, right? So what is the error budget? So you first define your SLI, SLO, and SLA. Suppose your SLA is 99.9% availability, which means 100 minus whatever is your committed SLA, right, will be your error budget. So basically, all it means is every quarter, my service can go around for 2.16 hours. So that essentially is your error budget. And how does it help? Which means the development teams can use this budget to do any innovation. They can look at release, do a faster release. So they have that ownership in terms of leveraging this to the way they want, right? historically what happens is you cannot the development teams always pushes for releases. They don't worry about the operations aspect of it. They say I need to have a release, business is pushing me, I need to have a release next week, right? No, operations team will say no, it is too soon, I need to know your information about what the releases are, there are dependencies, I have a own release lined up. So there is always a friction in terms of release between development and ops. Now, with the error budget, what you are telling is you have a SLA you are signing up to. Up to the SLA error budget, you are free to make releases as you want, right? So the onus is on the development team to look at my SLA and say whatever my error budget is, and then do any changes they want to do an innovation, or they want to release a feature quickly to validate with the customer. They are free to do it, right? But the only catch is once they reach the SLA, then the entire releases is stopped, right? So that's something that is agreed with the product owner or business, which means the product team has the accountability to make sure the SLAs are committed, right? So any breach of that, the release gets freezed till the teams put the entire effort on stabilizing the system to see what the problems are and fix it. So which means this is a good way of driving collaboration between dev and ops, right? It is policing by the dev team. So this is because dev teams have equal responsibility to make sure the services level agreements are also adhered to, right? So, and also it slowly aligns the teams together. And also, and the most important thing is now everybody needs to be very careful about the SLI, SLO, and SLA, including business. So they cannot say I need 100%. Right? They have to really see what is the impact. They look at the data and they see. So that helps. So this is a very important concept or our practice probably that seems simple but has a huge impact in terms of the way the operations world is done. Right? Next slide. So the third one is toil, right? So we also say toil reduction as one important aspect of SRE teams. So what is toil, right? So basically any work, right? And this is important. So anything to do with production systems. So SRE is always focused on production systems, not any other platforms, right? So any work with the production system that is manual, right? It is repetitive, right? It is basically you can automate it, and it is tactical, right? And it is not having any value, right? And effort scales linearly. So this is what is a time. So the point is you need not automate every manual operations for a production system. For example, if you are trying to run a script every 6 months or every year, right? Then the ROI in terms of automating may not help. So you also define what a toil is, right? You don't categorize everything as toil. So toil is basically that adheres to whatever is written here, right? So that is important, so that you define your backlog for your toil for the systems that you are running, and you see whether it makes sense to automate it or not, right? So that is toil reduction. So which is a very important aspect of SRE as well, right? Going to the next slide. Now, what is a day in the life of a SRE engineer, right? So if you are a SRE engineer, how does it look like? So first one is important, right? So engineering focus. So one of the key aspects is a SRE engineer has to make sure his and this is something some of the practices of Google, right? So there would be some changes for different enterprises, but if you are trying to drive some of the engineering aspects or toil reduction, but the focus should be on 50% operations work. So SRE engineers generally are focusing on operations, managing the production systems for 50%. The remaining 50% is on the engineering aspects of it. So that is that. So that is one. Second thing is again they look at stability of the systems based on the SLA, right? How do they manage? Looking at the error budget and seeing how the features versus stability. So they are also looking into that. Of course, as part of operations, they also look at observability, implementing the automation for monitoring, right? Looking at alerts, ticket logging, right? Of course, we also look at how do I measure things and also toil reduction. So toil reduction is basically your engineering focus, anything on automation or any. They also probably can also be part of the development team also. Depends on different enterprises how they are structured. So this is a typical day in the life of a SRE, right? These are the aspects that they work on a day. Next slide. Of course, I'll not get into, but again, work distribution, right? These are the four buckets, right? Software engineering is again, what does it mean? Automating, focusing on service availability, scalability, right? Anything on writing code to improve the system. The second thing is systems engineering, configuration of the systems, operating configurations, right? It could be your DevOps, infrastructure as a code, monitoring, performance tuning, or system engineering. Now, of course, TOIL is something we have already looked at. And of course, there could be some other overheads, right? They have to do with their enterprise. From a company standpoint, they might probably fill up some organization processes and all those things. So this is a typical work distribution across those four buckets. The first three are something that is of importance. We can go to the next slide. So I'll not touch upon two things, but this is HCL's point of view of how can you drive SRE automation maturity roadmap for different enterprises. Right. So what we have said is we have bucketized into four aspects. Right. One is because SRE is a large from an operations side, it's a large world. So how do you bucketize and drive maturity? See, one is process optimization. Right. Every enterprise will have operations or processes. How do I drive automation and optimize that is one. And toil reduction could be anything that is manual, right? We discussed. The third one is monitoring, because monitoring is important for you to do predictive plan how the systems are behaving, right, proactively. And the fourth one is more of the development cycle, whether it is quality gates, right, architecture fitness function, or silence engineering. So it's more of the development life cycle of how do I improve the quality of my code. Basically, it's a shift left. You're looking at how do I improve code quality and how do I ensure checks across the life cycle. So this is the second part of what SRE is all about, right? In a nutshell, basically, we are saying SRE is implementing the DevOps principles. It is a set of practices that Google is open sourced. You have a lot of documentation on SRE from Google's website as well, right? A lot of books on SRE as well, right? And the third one, again, we also discussed some of the key aspects. Toil reduction is all about reducing repetitive manual tasks for operation system. Right? We also looked at error budgets in terms of defining service level indicators, then objectives and SLAs. Right? And of course, looking at the broader aspects of automating the entire operations. This is a summary of what SRE is all about in a very nutshell, because SRE is a large topic, but the intent was to see the more than understand SRE and then the opportunities that we have. Right? So we can go to the next section. Kirulo, we can go to the next slide. This will be the last session, and then we can take a couple of questions. Probably this might be something interesting for you guys, right? In terms of why SRE, right? Why should I worry about SRE today? I'm already having a certain role. I have a good job. Why should I worry about SRE, or why? What is that? It's for me. See, first thing is it's a career jumpstart, right? People in operations, if you want to really upskill yourself, it could be a good way of jumpstarting into SRE world, right? It's a hottest job in the market. If you just look at jobs across, right? SREs are well-paid jobs for the right talent and skill. Right? You don't have too many SRE engineers at the market, right? Talent scarcity. We don't have too many people from the operations world say they are SRE engineers, but we have spoken to a lot of people, but they are not SRE in the true sense of it. They are just operations folks who have just said rebranded themselves as SRE. So that is one problem that we have in the market. So your talent scarcity, which means we need more SRE engineers in the market. And to be relevant, if you think that I'm an operations engineer and I'm fine with this, but I did explain what's happening in enterprises in terms of the product mindset, in terms of the ways of working. So to be relevant, this could be a very good way to get into it. and ride the digital transformation wave. So every organization, large organizations, so in Europe, I've been part of a lot of transformations for a lot of customers. Every company in the last 2 3 years have been focusing on moving to a product-based alignment, which essentially means that they will also be focusing on how do I transform my operations, and SRE is a key tenet of the transformation. So hence, SRE is going to be a critical, is a very good career option for all you guys listening on to this session. Right? Next session. So, just a minute on this, not more than that, because the subsequent slide, you need to understand the competency model. So from HCL, we have started looking at DREYFUS as a competency model, right? In terms of how do you look at competency of people, of talent, because we have moved away from number of years of experience to a competency-based model, because we see number of years of experience in IT is not the right way of measuring competency of people. Right? So we are moving away from number of years to say defining a competency definition. So here we adopt DREYFUS as our competency definition. And of course, I'll not get into, but there are 5 levels. You start with novice to expert. Right? And of course, novice is like a fresh engineering graduate, and then expert is a SME in his or her skill or field. So this is the way we kind of internally drive competency, upskilling, hiring of people. Next slide, Kiru. Now this might be something interesting, right? So SRE, what are the for a SRE engineer? So P means proficient as per the competency definition, right? So for a SRE engineer, what are the skill set he needs to understand? Because it's a complicated thing, right? Where SRE engineers has to understand the dev world, he has to understand the operations world, understand infrastructure, understand security. It's a mix of all, right? So basically, he should have a very good DevOps tooling understanding, right? When I say level is proficient, he should have at least, he or she should have some scripting knowledge, right? It could be Python scripting or shell script or any programming language that could be good to have. So fundamentally, we should have a DevOps plus scripting, and then on top of that, some understanding of monitoring, right? He has to be competent in monitoring. He could be a beginner, advanced beginner in infrastructure, networking, core programming, and understanding of operations is also important, because you need to understand at least some understanding of ITIL in terms of what's happening in enterprises, because even though that's changing, but some understanding will help. Actually. So this is the skill set of what a proficient SRE engineer needs to have, a mixed bag where he has to understand a lot of aspects. So this is a typical skill set of SRE. Now, next slide. And generally, how does it? Where does a SRE engineer sit? Right. So these are 3 configurations of team. See, one is SRE engineers work with ops and dev. They can be a separate team by itself. Horizontal team that is supporting both the development and ops to kind of improve the maturity. There are and some of the operations team are moving towards a SRE model, so they want to move every engineer to be SRE ways of working, right? And you also have a product teams. The last one, basically SRE embedded within dev team, is basically product teams, where within the product teams you have people driving operations within the team, right? So these are the 3 constructs where you possibly might have them. You might have more, but these are the standard constructs where SRE engineers get aligned to. So we can go to the next slide. So this is probably a good slide, right? So, okay, fine. I understood the challenges, changes in the market space. I know what SRE is. Now, how do I get started? Right. So these are some inputs, right? I will not say this is the only way to go, right? But somewhere you need to start. So you can probably start with understanding a scripting, because scripting is important, because for any toil reduction to happen, some scripting has to be done. You have to automate it, right? And Python is something that most of the operations team and many of the enterprises do have Python as a scripting language, right, within the enterprise. So any scripting language is important. Understanding DevOps principles. When I say DevOps, more on the not on the practices, but on more in terms of technology, in terms of continuous integration, continuous deployment, pipeline tooling, be it a Jenkins or a Maven, some of the build tools, understanding how a Git repo works, like branching version strategy. The entire SDLC life cycle is something important for SRE engineer to understand. And of course, some understanding of microservices, because as you know, across enterprises, cloud first is a way of thinking, and then microservices are something that is something that every company is adopting. And of course, when I say microservices, understanding how it is built, right? Some of the challenges, patterns, best practices, and of course, databases, NoSQL databases is something you need to understand. Some understanding of databases, and of course, version control is something is part of the DevOps tooling. And last one is important, Kubernetes, understanding containers, because now entire platforms, the production boxes are all running on containers. So that's something it's important for you to understand, cloud first and containers. So this is a summary of how to get started. All right. Next slide. Yeah, that's the end of the session. If there are any questions, we can probably start. I'll try to respond to some of the questions or any clarifications. I'll try my best to address, if any. I guess you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Rajesh. That was surely a very valuable session diving into the SRE world. And we have few questions from our audience, and we can take a look at them now. Can you explain the difference between site reliability engineers and development operations? This is asked by Nuan.
Hey, everyone. So actually, if you look at, right, SRE is a way of running my operations team. So I would not say it is completely different. Basically, I would put it in this way: you have a development operations team, and they are doing a certain ways of working. If so, SRE is all about moving to a set of practices that Google says had helped them drive operations or drive efficiency and bring about reliability in my systems. So it's all about leveraging these practices. So, for example, if you want to make the development operations into an SRE engineer, so it's all about looking at some of the principles that I talked about, looking at error budgets, looking at defining SLI, SLOs, doing blameless postmortems. How do I drive handoff reduction? How do I automate my entire platforms? So you should look at it in that way, basically saying that from the current ways of working, how do I get into a SRE ways of working? So I would put it that way rather than kind of giving a difference. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rajesh. We can move on to the next one.
So it's so that's a good question, right? And that's always a challenge. Even though the error budget concept seems simple, but it's kind of challenging to implement because a lot of team needs to come together. For example, the business has to sign off on error budgets, right? Which means business has to define the SLI, SLO, SLAs for the service. The development team has to also, or the product team or a Scrum team who is managing that service has to sign off. So it's a collaboration across different teams. It cannot be a single team. That's why the product mindset is important. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. Unless business signs off on it, it's going to be tough to implement. Right? That's where many of the enterprises are struggling because business has to sign off, and when business and IT themselves are in silos, then it's going to be tough. So I guess it is a collaboration. Predominantly, both IT and business has to sign up.
Thank you, Rajesh. I believe that was a descriptive answer for that question, and we can move on to the next one.
Sure. Yeah, that's enough. So as I was saying, right, historically there were silos. If you look at, I explained some aspects of DevOps principles, right? So the DevOps principle is basically to look at bringing the teams together, right? For example, see some of the things, practical things that we did in one of the accounts, right? The teams were in silo. So what we did, we asked the developer, one of the development team to be part of operations for the application for that application operations team, right? So for example, there is application A and there is a development person there. So he was part of the operations team, which is managing the application lead. So which means, and then similarly, we moved the operations guy to be part of development team. Because many times the problem is, unless you are part of the team, you don't know the pain, right? The development team always gets the benefit. They always get a mail that, yeah, we have released a product to production, the business signs off, they get mailers. Unfortunately, operations teams only get an escalation for tickets, right? They never get an appreciation for the effort they are putting. So it's all about the small things, right? But some of the SRE practices are basically to drive that. Like error budgets, for example, if you look at its collaboration between the teams, or for that matter, toil reduction is about collaboration, right? So the small things of understanding each other's pain is important. I gave an example of how it is, but there's a lot of things that we can do to drive. And SR is all about driving that relationship. That's the
Thank
hope.
you, Raj. Yes. I think with the time we have time to go for a one last question.
Sure.
We can see what's there.
And also, I think it's a pertinent question, right? And probably one of the reasons of having the tech talk is to see, to give information of what's happening in the market space and help IT professionals like you to give some career guidance, as well as to see what is there in HCL. For example, SRE is big time, not just in Europe, but across ROW as well as US as well as India. Because as I was saying, every enterprise is moving towards product-based teams, and SRE is very critical for the success of these ways of working, right? And as I was saying, and of course we have a dearth of SRE professionals, and I am part of talent development. We also hire talent. We also train people. We also train DevOps professionals into SRE, right? And for in specific to Sri Lanka, we definitely have large opportunities, because some of the top customers in Sri Lanka are also moving towards the SRE visa work. So for sure, SRE is a hot job, and of course, it also requires a lot of preparation and learnings. Right, it comes with the job as well. So it's a one of the hottest jobs in the market. And Sri Lanka also, we will be also having a lot of opportunities for people like you, Dalil.
Yes. Thank you, Rajesh. And that concludes the question Q&A round as well, and the session for today's TechBiz talk. And we are hoping to come up with a new topic, emerging topic in the IT atmosphere, and connect with you probably in the next month. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, all.